One of the biggest mistakes that we make as parents is when we look at our children, we confuse confidence with self-worth. And that's a really, really important difference, because if we get that wrong, we'll assume they're okay when they're not. And they'll assume that they're okay when they're not. And what I mean is that confidence is about your belief in how capable you are at doing a specific thing. Dealing with a specific scenario, with a specific setting. Whereas self-worth is how you feel about things when it doesn't go your way. So the difference between confidence and self-worth is most often misconstrued because we see them doing well at school, academics, in their career as well. And then we assume that because they're doing so well and they come across so boldly and so confidently in how it is they deliver their positions and their views on things, we think that that is a healthy self-esteem, but it's not. A healthy self-esteem is only revealed when who they are is under focus. Not what they accomplish, not what they do, not what they're expected to do, but who they are. And that's usually what shows up in a relationship. And that's the kind of thing that causes someone to go from being the sweet, amicable, kind of romantic before they get into a relationship or into marriage. And then after marriage, when the expectations change, they suddenly turn out to be someone that no one can relate to. It's like, what happened to you? Why did you change like this? Were you just gaslighting me? Were you, whatever it is, all these ridiculous terms, catfishing and all of that nonsense. It's not about that. It's about the fact that when expectations shift about what it is that we believe is needed from us, we only realize how that expectation affects us when it might provoke an insecurity. And that's our demons that I always talk about. When we're struggling with our demons are the insecurities that lie dormant until a situation calls for us to show up in that way. And then only do we start grappling with anxiety and stress and overthinking and all of these things. And it creates a lot of problems just because we don't realize what the real problem is. And then we go about trying to find tools and mechanisms and exercises and affirmations and all of that to try and get us through that and try and get us to cope with it. And you get some people that are seemingly clever coming along and telling you that you suffer from this anxiety disorder or that anxiety disorder. It's got nothing to do with that. It's not a disorder. It's that you have a blind spot about something that you didn't realize up until someone or some situation demanded for you to show up in a way that threatened your sense of adequacy. And that's what it comes down to, is we all want to feel adequate. We all want to feel significant. But the moment we in a situation where our adequacy is doubtful to us, not to others, to us, that's when we start compensating for it, overcompensating for it, deflecting attention away from us because of it and things like that. And that's where you end up with people starting to call you narcissistic and toxic and all of those nonsense, because they don't see the human anymore, they just see the behavior. And we also don't see the human in us. We only see how it is that we are expected to behave and how we can behave and how we try to behave. And all of that becomes just one massive mess. And the reason for that is because we lack self-awareness. But self-awareness is not something you can try and develop. Self-awareness is a state of being. Self-awareness, self-worth, self-esteem. It's a state of being. It's not a narrative. It's not a dialogue. So more often than not, we only realize where we're at from a self-worth, self-esteem perspective in hindsight. When we look back and we think, why did I allow that? Why did I do that? Why did I make myself available to that? Why did I allow them to treat me that way? That's a reflection of what your self-worth was in that moment. So you can't go into a space and claim your self-worth, because the moment you do that, you're defensive, right? And if you're defensive, you're going to go into a situation trying to claim your self-worth where your self-worth is not being questioned or is not being undermined in the first place, which means that you are most likely to come across offensively or defensively or aggressively or abrasively. And that's how people might find you to be arrogant and all of those things, right? So if we can identify the difference early on between confidence and self-worth, then we've got something to work with. And here's an easy way to identify it. Confidence is what you see when the success criteria is easy to identify. It's clear, it's plain, it's black or white. And that's why people come across as confident in their careers, in school, in university, and those sorts of settings. Because the criteria that you need to fulfill to be successful or to be perceived as successful or accomplished, it's clear. You know what grades you must get. You know what key performance indicators you must reach, KPIs. And that's the sort of thing that gives us assurance. And it's within that context that we feel safe. So it's within that context that we feel safe, right? And when we feel safe because the criteria for success is clear, and along with that criteria, there's a clear mandate and a clear authority that we inherit because of achieving that, then that's how it is that we almost take permission from that to be bold. And that's why confidence then comes across as someone who is like solid in who they are. They have a healthy self-worth and all of that. But that isn't self-worth. That's confidence. Self-worth is what happens when you achieve that criteria and the expectation of what it was supposed to afford you doesn't work out that way. How you deal with that is a reflection of your self-worth. So if you go ballistic, if you become unreasonable, aggressive, if you start behaving underhandedly, things like that, that's a reflection of your self-worth. Because who you think you are is what you make yourself available to. How you feel about yourself is how you treat others. If your internal conversation is harsh, you're going to be harsh with others. If you're judging yourself consistently, you're going to be very black and white and inflexible and rigid with others. That's just the way it works. It's not something that you can undo. It's something that is a consequence of. So to undo it, you can't just decide to do it differently. You have to shift your perspective about how you feel about yourself. But to shift your perspective about how you feel about yourself, it requires a sense of awareness and understanding. And that awareness and understanding doesn't come from judging whether you're good enough or judging whether others like you or not. It's about knowing who you want to be and then realizing why it is that you're struggling to be who you want to be. Because everyone wants to be a decent person. Everyone wants to be a decent human, right? The only reason we behave badly is because we feel justified in showing up in that way because other people either deserve that from us or they don't deserve our good side, or they need to realize that they're treating us badly and this is how we're going to treat them if that. And that's the sort of thing that plays out. We become very binary, very transactional in the way we then approach life because we don't know how to look beyond the immediate behavior. We're only looking at whether or not we are received the way we want to be received and whether or not they're treating us the way we want them to treat us. That's what happens when you focus on confidence. Now, some of the telltale signs in your child or in us even as adults is when you have a low self-worth is that you tend to not take a lot of pride, and I don't mean pride for the sake of looking a certain way. I'm saying you don't take pride and you don't have gratitude for who you are and what you have. So what would happen then is that things like hygiene levels will probably not be where it needs to be. Things like keeping your workspace and your home environment organized and tidy or clean is another thing that reflects a low self-worth. How you take care of the things that you have reflects a low self-worth if you don't take care of it in a good way. Expecting other people to pick up after you, expecting other people to afford you respect and good manners while you don't return the favor. Those are all indicators of a low self-worth, because basically a low self-worth is that I'm not going to worry about whether there's credibility in my claim for something. I'm only going to focus on whether I am entitled to it or not. Because if you take something that you're entitled to without having worked for it, without having earned it, without treating others in a way that makes it valid for you to expect it from them, then your self-worth is low, your self-respect is missing. Because your self-respect is how it is that you want to be, not how it is that you need to be treated. And in that case, if your self-respect and your self-worth is at a healthy space, then even if someone treats you badly, you'll see it as a reflection of who they are. You won't necessarily see it as a reflection of who you are. Another thing that happens when you have your self-worth in a good space is that you won't care who might be criticizing you or having something negative to say about you or giving you feedback. All you'll be interested in is whether there's merit in what they're saying or not. So they can come across abrasively, they can come across nasty, deliberate, spiteful, whatever it is. It wouldn't matter, because what you're interested in is, are they correct in anything that they're accusing me of? And if you focus on that, then you know you focus on growth. But you can't also do that now deliberately, because this is where we go wrong, right? We try to be so deliberate about life that we lose the sweetness and the joy of life. And if anything, that's the one thing that I'm constantly trying to get my finger on, is how is it that we enjoy the sweetness of life despite the trials and the struggles and the difficulties that life throws at us. And that is got to do with what it is that you perceive to be the reason for things not going your way, or the reason for people not treating you the way you want to be treated. And if that perception is tainted because of past experiences that you don't realize you're projecting onto the present moment, automatically you lose the sweetness and you lose the joy of that moment. And then your happiness and your successes will all be very fleeting. It will be very short-lived. It's like there's no shortage of people who come to me and talk to me about how it is that they have all the trinkets of success. They've got a good career, they're driving the car they've always wanted, they're earning a good salary, they're respected by their peers, they have a good relationship with their partner, but something still feels missing. And every single time that they've achieved major milestones in their career or in their life, it was like, yay, okay, now what's next? And that's how we keep chasing and chasing and chasing. And that is a good reflection of a low self-worth and low self-awareness. Because all of those things set in motion a long time ago. Probably in our young years when we were still like learning how to talk even, or even just getting into early school years and things like that, where we started realizing that if the people around us are celebrating what we achieve, then who we are doesn't matter if we don't achieve that. And this is how, without meaning to, this is how we raise our children to believe that that is all that matters. And that's why I am 100% dead set against the unhealthy emphasis we place on academic achievement. We're raising academics who are not good humans. And that's a problem. That's why we have the kind of problems we have in the world and in our communities and in our families, is because everyone is now focused on being successful, but no one is focused on understanding the human, on connecting with the human, on being human. Because then being human becomes a matter of good manners, being polite and protocol and decorum. That's not being human. That's just operating within a certain social structure because you know that's going to be acceptable or that's going to be celebrated or something or the other. So if we want to move beyond that, if we want to have meaningful, deep relationships with the people that matter to us, we need to be able to understand what a deep relationship looks like. And not only looks like, but we also need to be available to offer that deep relationship, that depth of engagement, that depth of interaction. And that's the problem. You don't know what you don't know. So if you're going to go around just judging all the time about whether someone is good or bad, treating you well or not treating you well, and just stopping at that point, you're going to become judgmental and you're going to destroy a lot of good relationships in the process, because you're going to walk away from relationships for the wrong reasons and you're going to walk into relationships for the wrong reasons. And that's why the self-awareness and mindfulness is so important. So if you are a parent and you're listening to this, and you're driving and emphasizing consistently how it is that academic performance is the most important thing ever, and that everything else, you have your life and everything else after you get a good job and after you get a good career and all of that, you're raising a very imbalanced human, because they're going to become so defined by their accomplishment that they're going to start looking down on others who don't match that accomplishment. They're going to start assuming that goodness lies in people who are driven in the same way. They're going to start looking at how it is that if people don't respect their accomplishment of theirs, that means they don't respect who they are. And this is where we run into a whole lot of problems, because that's where the defensiveness comes from, that's where the anger comes from, that's where the anxiety and the abuse and the depression, all of that, it all stems from that. And strangely enough, as much as most people won't believe this, the three easiest things to resolve is anxiety, depression, and anger. Because all of those are about perception. Other stuff beyond that, where it requires participation and cooperation from others in that is a bit more complex. things that we can't understand why it is that we feel insecure or triggered in a certain way, that's more complex. But to understand where our anger comes from or why we use anger to express ourselves, to understand why it is that we feel depressed, to understand why it is that we are anxious all the time, that understanding is the easiest part. And I can take you through it very quickly. Depression is the absence of hope. Don't overcomplicate it. And the absence of hope is a result of something important to you that looks hopeless, or that you have good reason to believe that the future is not going to be enjoyed with that anymore because it's not available to you. That's why you're losing a loved one, losing a job, or losing a relationship or something like that has such a massive impact and causes us to feel depressed. That's why failure feels like depression. Because if we pinned so much hope on that success and we didn't achieve it, then everything that was supposed to have been a consequence of that, all the goodness, all the success, all the social stature and everything else associated with that, all became under threat. And when that all comes under threat, we lose hope about achieving that social standing or that position with our loved ones or the respect or admiration that we were looking for. And that's why if you're defined by your successes, that's confidence. And that confidence will then eventually fail you when it doesn't yield the kind of reaction or results that you want. And that's why you end up with a lot of people who are extremely successful, but they have no meaningful personal relationships. And if they're not looking in the right spaces, they would assume automatically that it's because of envy and jealousy and all sorts of things from the people that they're trying to interact with, or how people are using them and everything else. And they attribute that to not having the meaningful relationships. Meanwhile, they just won't realize how it is that they're not emotionally available enough to be able to attract the kind of person that is looking for that kind of emotional availability rather than those tokens of success. So that brings us to another important point, right? Well, let's just get through the 3 points I said quickly. So depression, absence of hope. And I'm not diminishing anyone's depression. I'm saying that if you're feeling depressed, understand what it is that you've lost hope of, and understand that that one thing is so pivotal in your life that it has rendered everything else to be of no consequence. Because that's what it's like, right? You feel depressed about something and you look around you and you think, none of that matters because I don't have this. How many times don't we do that? So none of that matters if I don't have that admiration or that recognition or that significance from people that are important to me. So then you can be a megastar. It doesn't make a difference. You'll go and lose yourself to substance abuse and reckless lifestyles and everything else because you're trying to escape the fact that you're not enough for the people that matter to you. That's where depression comes from. The anxiety is associated with that because anxiety is about you preempting what the next moment is going to offer, or what the outcome or the consequence is going to demand of you, or what it is that is probably going to happen relative to what you want must happen. So if I want to be able to resolve something with my partner and I see that there's a low probability of it being resolved, that will make me feel anxious because it's such an important thing that I don't want to contemplate life without it. And that's how anxiety steps in. Anxiety is our belief in our inability to deal with what we think is likely to happen. And because we just can't afford for that to happen, we can't see ourselves being okay if it doesn't happen. That's where anxiety comes from. And then the overthinking associated with that is all the scenarios we play out in our head. And the reason we play out scenarios in our head is because we need to be prepared, because we don't trust ourselves to be able to navigate something when it presents itself. Can you see the spiral, right? That's how we end up spiraling and going out of control and losing ourselves to a situation because we assume that that is a definition. The outcome of that is going to define the rest of our lives. It doesn't. Nothing is ever that pivotal in life that the rest of your life is defined by a single moment. It can be informed and inspired by a single moment, but it's not defined by it. And then the third one was anger management or anger, just anger itself. Anger is a defense mechanism. And like I always tell people, when you try to control your anger, that's like taking a Mentos and throwing it into a bottle of diet soda and then putting your hand over it to hope that you can control it from actually exploding. It's stupid. You can't, because there's a natural reaction. And that natural reaction is out of your control. And that's what happens. When we don't realize what is in or out of our control, we then get angry about our inability to control it. So, anger, being a defense mechanism, is a demand for significance when you feel as if who you are in that setting, in that relationship, in that group, if you believe that who you are is under threat, your significance, your adequacy in that group or in that relationship is under threat, the anger is there to demand significance if you don't take my efforts seriously. If you don't accept the good of who I am, then experience the bad of who I am so that you'll appreciate my good efforts towards you in the first place. That's where anger comes from. So anger we'll unpack in more detail in another episode. Right now, I just want to focus on understanding self-awareness, mindfulness, and how it is that self-worth and confidence is just not one and the same thing. So confidence is easy to develop if your self-worth is in a good space. But if you don't have self-worth, confidence becomes your crutch. Because confidence is about your competence in being able to navigate certain spaces and do certain things. So when you have a high level of confidence but low self-worth, guess what you're going to do? You're going to try to control things. And you're going to try to control things because having control allows you to be significant, to be relevant, to be adequate. Now, control doesn't give you power. Contrary to common beliefs, it does not offer you power. What control gives you, the primary reason for control, is predictability. If I can control something, I know what I'm dealing with. I know what I can expect. I know what is possible. I know what the variables are going to be. If I can't control it, then I have to be competent enough to be able to deal with whatever eventuality comes out of it, but I don't know what it's going to be. It's unpredictable, so I just have to be solid in where I'm at. And that's the part where the self-worth beats us up, because we think that we are incapable of that. We lose sight of the fact that we have the ability, because you wouldn't have gotten to this point in your life if you didn't have that ability. But we'll come back to that in a minute. So the whole point of control is predictability, because predictability affords us the opportunity or the higher probability of being competent. And our ability to be competent improves our ability to be influential, which then secures our significance. So this is how complex we are as humans. I've always said we're not simple beings, we're complex beings. And we're strategic in nature, by default. Whether you think you're a strategist or not is irrelevant. By nature, we are strategic, which is we're always looking at what are the potential outcomes and consequences that we might have to deal with, and that's how we mitigate it based on how we approach it. So if we believe we're not going to be adequate, we'll do a whole lot of things to compensate for that so that we reduce the probability of someone thinking that we're inadequate. And that's how you end up with relationship problems, and you end up with people talking past each other and having difficulty understanding each other. And I've said this a million times, but you're just never getting it, because what they're hearing is what they're looking for, not what you're saying, and all of those sorts of things. And that's how a low self-worth complicates life significantly. But where does it come from? Let's just delve into that very quickly. So, and like I said, I'll unpack anxiety and depression and anger in more detail in separate episodes. So where does all of this come from? Our fathers teach us how life works. That's where our self-worth comes from. And our mothers teach us how people work. That's where our empathy, compassion, and our ability to navigate complex relationships and important relationships comes from. So if you have a healthy grounding from both, then automatically you don't work with that as your fears, which means that your capacity to focus on what you need to do is just much more bigger, so to speak. So if I enter a space where I'm required to solve a problem of sorts, a technical problem, achieve academic outcomes or things like that, and I don't get into there wondering or being afraid of what does it mean if I don't, the level of stress I'll experience in trying to achieve it will be significantly less than one who goes in there with all the fears and all of the stress and all of the weight of what happens if I don't do this. And that's how you reduce your capacity significantly, because you're consumed with the overthinking of the consequences if you don't make a success of this. And that's why you'll find some people just take things in their stride, and other people are very deliberate and very intense about needing to be effective at what they're doing. It's because it's self-worth, that sense of self is getting in their way. So when your confidence levels are high and your self-worth is low, like I said, that's what's going to cause problems. So if we get ourselves, let's just stop for a minute and consider why it is that we get this from our parents and how that plays out. It's not a matter of whether our parents were good parents, bad parents, available or unavailable. It's a matter of what we take from that relationship, what we assume to be true about our significance to them relative to how it is that they showed up for us. Now, how they show up for us is going to be a combination of their ability, their resource, their capability, their opportunity, and also their demons. Because they're human, just like we're human. But we lose sight of this. Parents lose sight of the fact that behind that child, there's a human struggling to fit that role, fill that role of the child, who's struggling to also find their place in this world and understand how life works and their identity and everything else. And children forget that behind every adult, there's a human who's struggling in their own ways, with their own insecurities, their own aspirations, their own dreams that were failed, or their own betrayals of trust, etc., that then hampers how it is that they show up in that role as an adult. And this is why when we start talking about toxic this and toxic that, you diminish all of the human struggles and you reduce everyone to that one single label that you want to allocate to them. Which is why I completely disagree with labeling people and labeling behaviors in that way, because all it does is it makes it easy for us to be able to deal with them. It makes them more manageable for us, more predictable for us, and it demands less mindfulness and less sincerity on our part to be able to establish understanding or goodness in that relationship. So the reason why we get the self-worth from our fathers is because by nature, and this is supported across the board, including mainstream psychology, strangely enough, by nature, men are analytical and practical, right? They're problem solvers. That's why you'll find that a man will appear impersonal and unemotional on something that has a heavy sentimental value to a woman, for example. This is not being genderist or sexist or anything like that. That's just the nature of who we are. Yes, there'll be exceptions, but the exceptions are not the norms, and it's the norms that create the problems in society, not the exceptions. So, as a norm, a man is likely to approach something from a very analytical, practical, pragmatic kind of way. And if their partner is looking for them to be a bit more emotionally sensitive to how that practical problem is affecting them, they'll be oblivious to it for the most part, unless they have a healthy sense of self, because you can't give what you don't have. So if a man hasn't experienced that kind of awareness of emotion and sentiment and connected with that emotional expression in their formative years, then it makes it that much more difficult for them to relate to the sensitivities of their partners. The reason, and just to complete that thought, so the reason why that informs our self-worth is because our ability to create value is what enamors us, is what builds our belief about the fact that we can be of value to others. Now the second one, the how people work, that's our belief that we belong, that we have a tribe, that someone has our back, that who we are is significant. And that we get from our mother, because that's a nurturer. That's where we feel as if who we are was important enough to be cared for, etc. And then that is established as your overall sense of self. And then how that shapes up, or what you took from those two relationships, is what will determine what is your kind of personality and characteristics when people experience you. And the worst thing you can do when you get to that point is assume that this is just who I am, accept me, take it or leave it. Because that shows that you have absolutely no inclination for both accountability or growth. And accountability is a prerequisite for growth. And without growth, you will stagnate and you will feel as if there's nothing that life offers you. And that's where depression starts setting in. So it all ties up. It's all intertwined, right? So you can't treat any of these things as independent kind of components, because you have to understand that the way the human is formed in their sense of self, in the way they show up in life, it's a consequence of all of these life experiences from these different domains and different facets of what teach us how what our place is in this world. So, like I said, it doesn't matter about whether your parents were good, bad, available, unavailable, present or absent. Because yes, it makes things a whole lot easier if they are present and wholesome and grounded and available, right? That's the ideal. But it doesn't mean that if they're not, that you can't be okay. Because what you see as the reason for them not being that the way you need them to be is what is important. It's our perception of something that matters more than what it is, right? If we look at something and we think it's a threat, we'll feel threatened. If we look at something and we think, well, it's an inconvenience, we'll just suck it in and do something about it. And that's the difference. Our perception of what we take for or what we assume to be the reasons for why people treat us the way they do, that's more important than why they're actually treating us that way. So even if someone believes with sincerity and conviction that they are treating you this way because of what you did or who you are or whatever it is, as much as that can be true, you can still look at it and think, well, okay, it's because this might be rubbing them up the wrong way because of that experience or because of what they need that doesn't gel with me. I don't resonate with that value that they're wanting me to live up to. So that's why we're going to have that contention. And if you have that healthy kind of grounding point about it's okay for us to be different in that way, it makes it a lot easier for you to find a compromise or find a balance, or even to walk away from a relationship like that, because you just recognize that, okay, we just want different things, not because you're a bad person or you're a toxic person or anything like that. It's just we're different. What is important to me is not important to you. My insecurities are provoking you and your insecurities are provoking me. And as a result of that, we need to have the maturity and the presence of mind to realize that it's just the consequence of who we are doesn't give us an opportunity to create the kind of relationship or life that we would want to create. That's a meaningful way of approaching something, as opposed to assuming that you're being treated a certain way because of what they think of you. No, we can't give what we don't have. If I don't have it within me to treat myself with patience and understanding and kindness, it's going to be that much more difficult for me to make excuses for the next person's behavior when I see them struggling with their own demons. And like I always tell people, relationships is not the thing you should focus on. A relationship is actually the symptom or the outcome of the two people in the relationship. And if you're going to lose sight of the two people in the relationship and you're going to focus on the relationship, you're going to lose sight of the humans. And why do you have problems in a relationship in the first place? Because one or both of them feel as if their human needs are not being met, or not being considered, are not being treated with sensitivity. So we need to shift our approach to life and our approach to understanding ourselves. And to finish off what I started with, saying that self-worth is not a narrative. Self-worth is not a dialogue that happens in our head where we tell ourselves that we're like this and we're like that, or we're good or we're bad. That dialogue is a reflection of our self-worth. It isn't our self-worth. So if we're constantly beating ourselves up, that's a reflection of a low self-worth. It doesn't mean that we have a low self-worth because we're beating ourselves up. We beat ourselves up because our self-worth is low. So understanding what informs that belief that we have about whether we are valued or not valued, or valuable or not, and all of that, that's the work that we need to do, is understanding why we have those beliefs. Because why we have those beliefs is going to determine how we deal with those beliefs, or how we show up because of those beliefs. And the mainstream, unfortunately, distracts you from all of this, because it takes those beliefs, bundles it up into a bunch of so-called symptoms, and it says you suffer from something. And that is so problematic. It is so dehumanizing. It's actually insane, beyond sad. Because think about it, right? Let's just use depression as an example. If someone has had a critical loss of something that is important to them that they never ever communicated with anyone else, because just the circumstances of their life just didn't give them a reason to believe that that would be important to anyone else. So they were singularly focused in their own private way on achieving that or having that for themselves, or having that relationship, for example. And then something happens out of their control that takes that away from them. But because they had so much of their future aspirations pinned on that being true, they get depressed, right? Now, we look at it and we think, well, people pass on, or failures happen, or relationships break up. So just like, where's your self-respect? Pick up and move on. But that's because we're inserting ourselves in their space, and we're assuming that the way we would deal with that is the way they should deal with that. So that's why if you're not dealing with it the way that we think is a healthy way for you to deal with it, you must be suffering from something. But that's not true. It's that we are not aware of or sensitized to why that is weighing them down as much as it is. The best thing you can offer them is fresh perspective, not a diagnosis. A diagnosis is insensitive, it is arrogant, it is, if anything, that's narcissistic. to assume that your way of approaching something is the correct way for someone else to approach it. We're all unique in our own ways. And I don't mean that frivolously or whimsically. We are unique because the experiences and the variables that shaped us in life is so vast and so complex that there's no two people who even grow up in the same environment with the same privileges and the same treatment that they will actually end up being the same way. They will have their unique takes on life because of their perspective, because of their vantage point, the assumptions that they make about what they see in front of them, what they take from it, what's important to them, what their inclination is. There's just too much that shape us into being the human that we are. So when we stop needing people to fit a mold, that's when we'll start seeing the human. And when you start seeing the human, you'll start seeing beauty in life. Otherwise, all you're going to see is a problem that needs to be solved, a compliance that needs to be achieved, a conformance that needs to be enforced. Because without that, we don't have social order and we don't have A, B, and C that's going to be available to us, so we can't have the life that we want, etc., etc., etc. We've lost the plot. That's not how humans work. Humans work by being seen, heard, understood. The same way that we want to be seen and heard and understood is the same way that others around us want to feel seen and heard and understood. And if we're going to be focusing on what we need first and foremost, without recognizing what that denies them when we're focusing on ourselves, we're going to lose sight of the impact that we have on others, and then we're going to assume that their behavior towards us has got nothing to do with us. And that's why accountability, reflection, introspection, self-awareness, all of that is critical to understanding your contribution towards the state in which you find yourself, either in a relationship, in life in general, in your career, in your work relationships, whatever it is. Understand the impact you have, because it's your impact and how you show up that will provoke the insecurities of others, or that will trigger them about things that are annoyances for them. And if you don't recognize that, yes, they're responsible for their triggers, but you become part of the problem if you abdicate accountability for provoking them in something that you can avoid. Hopefully that helps. It's opened up a lot of rabbit holes that I would love to be able to explore, but it's not, time doesn't permit. Otherwise, I'll be talking here for days, literally. So hopefully in the future sessions, I'm so used to being in coaching mode. Our future episodes will uncover more of this, or unpack more of this, and hopefully we'll start changing the narrative that we see in the mainstream about how it is that everyone is framed as a victim of something, and how you need to cope and then develop coping mechanisms and exercises and tools to be able to have a good life. Life doesn't work that way. We need to be more fluid, more realistic about how it is that we're showing up in life, so that we can apply our agency, our ability to choose and to rationalize and to understand and to overcome. We can apply that meaningfully, because that's where we get accomplishment from, and the accomplishment then makes us feel as if we're valued, or as if we can actually share value or create value for others. And that's what is fulfilling. Living a selfish life is not fulfilling at all. Living a selfish life makes us bitter, makes us arrogant, makes us prickly in many ways. And then we assume that people don't like us because they're jealous of us. It doesn't work like that. I could go on and on and on, but let's stop there. Thanks for listening, and please drop me a note on what works, what doesn't work about this, and what you would like me to see me uncover more. Or if you disagree with something I'm sharing, challenge me on it. If I can't defend my position from a logical, practical perspective that's not emotive, then I don't know what I'm talking about. And that's why you need to keep me honest in the same way that I'm asking you to keep yourself honest. Take care.